Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 260th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our televised discussions twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. Today, our panel will discuss the state and federal government involvement in public education. Leading off today is Patty Haskins, former member of the Wadsworth City Council and retired math teacher at Wadsworth Senior High. Then Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services, followed by Susan Hanlon, member of the Wadsworth City Council and retired dean of the College of Business at the University of Akron. Patty, the state of Ohio has a long history of influence over the public schools. But since the late 70s, the federal government has taken a major role in the management of the public schools nationwide. Now the Trump administration has announced its intention to shut down the federal Department of Education and return all authority to the states. What impact do you think this will have on the quality of public education?
I think before we can discuss the impact, we have to look at actually what the impact is right now of the Department of Education upon our state and local schools. The federal government became involved in public education back in 1867 under then President Johnson, and with their support for land grants and colleges and universities, and actually setting up vocational programs within schools. This expanded over the years. In 1953, under the Eisenhower administration, education actually became part of the cabinet, but under the Department of HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare. And it was joined with those three. And, amongst some of the duties they did was providing GI Bills to 8 million servicemen to cover college. That in 1958, they'd established the National Defense and Education Act, and this was due to the fear and part of the Cold War that the Russians were advancing faster than the United States was in math and science due to the fact that they launched Sputnik. So what was pushed for by the National Department of Education in its form at that time was to increase math, science, and foreign languages in our public schools, and to push for that to show excellence. I know myself, I was part of a program in Barberton that was established to push math, science, and foreign language. One of our panelists, Tom Finley, was actually one of my teachers in that program. And it was the national movement, or the National Department of Education, that pushed for this, not local schools. But the whole idea was to improve on the state of education in the country. They have since then pushed for anti-poverty and civil rights in 1964, in Title I in 1965, with the federal aid to the disadvantaged. In 1972, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which prohibited discrimination based on race, sex, and disability. They made civil rights and enforcement a focus of the Department of Education. The Higher Education Act and authority assistance was put into place. In 1980, the Department of Education was actually made its own cabinet post. This was under Carter, with an overall goal, as stated on their website, of promoting student achievement and preparation for global competitiveness by fostering educational excellence and ensuring equal access. And they hope to do this by establishing policies for federal financial aid, in the way of Pell Grants and various other things that they watch, collecting data on schools and disseminating research, which is important that the people in Ohio get the same opportunities that the people in Florida do, and make sure that everyone is on the same page, focusing national attention on key issues and making recommendations for reform, and prohibiting discrimination and ensuring equal access to education. And I think that's very important, because I think by having a national Department of Education, is what it does is provides norms and standards for throughout the country. So that if you go to school in Ohio, you are meeting the same standards as someone is living in Florida or South Carolina or Mississippi or California. And the only way to handle these standards and to make sure that all have equal access to education is by having these national standards. Now, when Trump came in, he picked as his Secretary of Education Linda McMahon, which, to me was farcical in that she really has no history in education. That is not her thing. She is very wealthy and very loyal, but I'm not sure how serious he was. I mean, he made the statement that he wants her to put herself out of a job. So he picks somebody, who's in my mind is incompetent for that job, and puts them in a position to get rid of that company and to get rid of that organization and to not have those guiding principles. I know one of his biggest moves so far is to say that there can be no DEI in local schools and in state schools and yada, yada, yada. Who's going to enforce that if you don't have a Department of Education to enforce it? Who is going to provide for those Pell Grants? Who is going to make sure that students that are disadvantaged are not treated unfairly unless we have a Department of Education? I know one of the other purposes of the administration as well is to get rid of unions. Now, as a union president for many years in this local district, I saw many, many times over the advantages of having a strong teachers union within a school district. The assumption that people have that they're only out for themselves is so totally untrue. If you had said in on any of the meetings we had, the primary concern for most teachers is the education that they're providing to their students and what's best for them. And I always approached every negotiation with the thought in mind, what is best for the students. But also, for some reason, people feel it's wrong for teachers to advocate for higher wages or better benefits. Well, if you want to attract the best and the brightest as teachers, if you want your children taught by the best and the brightest, you have to have a working situation that is going to draw them. And that's one of the things that the union accomplishes.
Well, thank you very much for your view from the point of view of Wadsworth, Ohio. Bryan, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'll tell you the short answer is just dismantle it. Send the money directly to the states. We're smart enough in Ohio to administer the billions of dollars that would come back through their agency after they sort of siphon off administrative costs. I did a little chat GBT. I'm getting a little conflicting information as far as the budget of the Department of Education. It seems that the only accurate numbers they've had is from 2007. If someone has some updated numbers as far as the administrative costs, said that there was over 4,000 employees of the Department of Education. I guess I'm sort of Milton Friedman. And I just think it's outlived its usefulness. I don't think we need a Department of Education on a federal level to tell us how to spend money in Ohio. I think we're smart enough to do that. We've come a long way. And I think it's outlived its usefulness. It's got, I mean, Patty's description of it fits it perfectly. It's got mission creep in it, talking about civil rights, talking about equality and all that kind of stuff. I think by any standard, and let's exclude the city of Wadsworth and the Wadsworth City Schools from this, the Department of Education has failed when you look at its matrix against and how it has developed over the years against other countries. We are getting creamed in math and science from countries that are considered third world. India kills us in math and science. Now, we can talk all day long about the effectiveness of this and that and the other. I'm just saying, let's take the money, block grant it to the states. We don't need 4,000 people to decide, you know, what the mission is and what our goals are. That could be done with 40 people meeting for 2 weeks in Washington to set the goals and to have those goals sent out to the states and say, guys, this is what we want you to achieve over the next X, you know, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. Here's the money to do it, and go ahead and do it. And then after that period, bring them all back together again and say, okay, how did Ohio do? How did Florida do? How did Alabama do? You know, I don't think we need this this department that has just blown out of proportion. One of the budgets was $238 billion. Another one was $80 billion. So that's where I don't want to talk about that, but that's real money that we could use in the state of Ohio. I don't think we need some overlord and the Department of Education telling us in Ohio how to spend our money. We have enough people in the state that basically get involved in our local schools as far as a state school board and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, there's two educators here. I'm all ears. I don't think the Department of Education would care less about, you know, unions or anything like that. That's a local issue, a state issue. I for one, I've had relatives that are teachers. I think in Wadsworth, we have a great relationship, the union and the schools. They've done a great job. I have no qualms with that. I just think when we're throwing around billions of dollars, that's real money. And we don't need a Department of Education to tell us how we need to spend that. We have enough smart people in Ohio that can address our issues, set goals, and administer that at a fraction of the cost. That's my 2 cents.
Susan, as an educator, what's your view?
I think they should shut it down also. And it's not, basically since 1979, when Jimmy Carter formed it, people have been trying to dismantle the Department of Education. I don't think that we should assume that the federal government is what keeps discrimination from occurring. I think that, you know, state and local processes can be relied upon. We don't need the federal government in there doing it. This issue of education is not a role that is given to the federal government by the Constitution. So, you know, why do we have this big bloated department? I also think that when it comes to higher ed, they're more trouble than they're worth. They have, for the last 2 years in a row, royally messed up the whole FAFSA thing. I mean, to the point where kids could not enroll in college because the Department of Education wasn't processing the applications. And there's so much waste in that program. I mean, it's a great program, don't get me wrong, but it is poorly administered. And I saw at the University of Akron on numerous occasions, firsthand, had students sit in my office to tell me, oh, I took all the money I could from the federal government. Now, what happens is if you qualify for $20,000, but tuition's only $10,000, you get a check from the federal government Well, what you do is they pay the school, and then the rest of that you get a check for. I had a woman tell me one time that she was an adult student, an adult learner. They put a screened-in porch on their house with the rest of that money. I heard kids talk about they spent that money on cars. They spent that money on spring break. They were using their federal student loan program money for that kind of stuff. So it's just, yeah, the intention was noble, but it just isn't making a difference. 55% of people have an unfavorable perception of the Department of Education. And then not so much in higher ed, but I think in, K through 12, there's a lot of unfunded mandates. The federal government wants all this stuff done, but then they don't want to pay for it. And so you have school districts, and I think like a lot of the testing is federally mandated. And I've heard teachers say, yeah, we teach to the test, and that's not how they want it. That's not what they want to do, but like they have to do it to get the money and blah, 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 blah. So, I just, I don't think we would miss it very much. And I think if there's a handful of good programs, keep those, give them to some other government entity, push it down to the states, do something different. But yeah, I'm okay with dismantling it.
Yeah, I guess go ahead.
You mentioned unfunded mandates, and I have for years railed against those, but most of the unfunded mandates that we got on this level was from the state. It wasn't from the federal government. So to push everything back to the states, that's not going to improve that problem. Also, like you said, there are a great many programs that the federal government, the Department of Education, does handle as far as FAFSA, Pell Grants, all of these types of things. Bryan, I saw a figure that $150 billion part of their budget is because of loans out to students. Now, yes, and Susan, I do know that happens where they give 20.
They're very irresponsible with them. Very irresponsible.
That needs to be corrected. That needs to be made more efficient.
But people think they're entitled to that now.
Yeah.
If you tried to take that away,
Yeah.
Well, you're taking it away completely if you get rid of the department, because nobody's going to pick that up.
I guess I just go back to the accountability.
Yeah.
When you deal with money, my philosophy has been the farther you send it away, the less accountable you are to it. And we have a state that throws all this stuff in there as far as, you hear this all the time, teaching to a test. The kids have to pass the test. We're failing our students.
Yeah.
We're failing them.
I heard years ago,
the student on the altar of the Department of Education. The Department of Education, they don't know that much about the student in Ohio. We have kids that pass up going to a good vocational program. I've harped on this for years. You can't find a friggin' plumber or an electrician because they pushed STEM. And there's a lot of kids that get left behind. I'd like to see some numbers, not just for Wadsworth, but school systems in Ohio. How many kids basically just sort of, go to college and fail?
Well, what do you think about the idea of also eliminating state departments of education and make everything local? What's wrong with that?
I have more trouble with the state department than with the federal. And, we have a state, unfortunately, that can't even get funding straightened out. I mean, how long ago was the ruling how we were being taxed unfairly to support public education? And the state our legislature has totally ignored that ruling. And
I don't think there would be anything wrong with that if we had a taxing authority maybe that operated at the state level and got pushed down to the local. The one issue with 100% local is there'd be so much unevenness. Like, how do you even out,
Oh, yeah.
really poor communities and really wealthy communities? And I think that's one thing the state funding attempts to do. But I agree. Why do they have to administer it all? Just give it to us, And then the other thing about money. Years ago, I heard a principal she was on the radio on a talk show, and she was principal of a school, a city school that had made great strides, and they hadn't gotten any extra money. And so they said, how did you do this? And she said, we don't need more money. We need higher standards, and we need to stick to them. She said, it's very simple. She said, what we're trying to teach in grade school, is not rocket science. It's the basics, the preparation for that. And she's like, we don't need more money. We just need standards and people to stick to them.
Right. But you mentioned the fact that there would be inequities between school districts within a state. But see, that's why you have the federal, to make sure that you have, from state to state, that you have equities. So you're not teaching different curriculums.
Well, and I don't think that's necessary. I mean,
but
state to state, I think it should be equitable within a state. I think states are states.
We have more kids graduating that can't read on the third grade level than ever before, because we're not dealing with reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Right.
Kids come out of kindergarten and first grade, they can't read. Now, where do we put that blame? Do we say, well, the Department of Education said we should do this, that, and the other? I think it's a local issue. Just give us the money. Just
what do you think? What do you think about the idea that public employees, whether they're in the state or federal, have to justify their existence somehow, and they have to keep setting new standards and new requirements, only for the purpose of keeping their job? What is that? That's the way it looks to me. How does it look to you folks?
I don't know about that. I mean, you hear people say that sort of thing. I don't have any firsthand kind of knowledge about that. The only thing I would say, though, is at a lot of, in education, there are a lot of funded positions, like we called it soft money. So it was money that was funded by a grant or this or that or the other thing. And I do think you saw some of that. It was like people were just desperate to keep expanding their scope, whatever, so that they could keep their grant and keep their job. And, sometimes those grants, it's just like, it's somebody's job to get the grants. So whether you need them or not, go out and get them.
It's funny. I used to always complain about every few years, somebody comes and reinvents the wheel in education. And that was always one of my problems. I mean, good teaching is good teaching. And, we would get, it was funny. Every new administrator I ever had a different way to write lesson plans. And it was the best way. And if I waited long enough, we'd be repeating ways that they did it 5 years before. Mm-hmm. And instead of allowing us to work with what worked for us and what was best in the classroom. So,
well, thank you very much for a wonderful program, but I just heard the signal that we're invited to leave. So goodbye, folks. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Or maybe 1 week. We'll have to figure that out.
You got me all worked up about this, John. Come on.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.